Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to another important topic, a very important area that we are going to start today. And today this lecture, my dear students, sort of a refresher course for you, because these things we have been talking about, the language 1 acquisition and language 2 learning. So why I have included this lecture here at the end of this course, because lots of students asked for it. They had sudden confusion that what is the language, first language learning acquisition, and how children learn language 1, right? And of course, how that affects our language 2 learning, right? So I thought that if people ask for it, so let's have a lecture or two on this important area. So we'll be meeting twice for this important the topic that we are going to start in this lecture, that is first language acquisition, right? And the next lecture, that will be 30th one, will be talking about language 2 learning. So this lecture will focus on L1 learning. So let's start this lecture. Before we start, as usual, we have to review the last lecture. You remember in the last lecture we saw the use of computer for language learning process, and we saw that how computer can be used in language classroom. And if you remember, we discussed that it's a process in which a learner uses computer to improve his language learning. So in simple words, we can say that students in fact improve their language, they learn language, being learners of course with the help of the computer. And we discussed that computer is a great source of learning, and particularly when you have access to internet, you have to access to the world, you can see different websites. There are so many well designed, well programmed websites are there, and if you use these websites, your learning would be faster and you can easily learn language. And the good thing is that in your free time, once the class is over and your learners go back home, they can browse different websites and they can improve their language learning. So that's why, in fact, my dear students, we had a lecture on it, that how computer can mediate language learning, how computer can assist language learning process. So this CAL is an important element for teaching and learning a foreign language. And now you know that it has become an integrated part of the research, and of course the computer helps the learners improving their essential skills of language learning. You will find lots of activities on reading skills, writing skills, listening skills, and speaking skills. If you are a user of the computer, and if you have internet skills, and if you have browsing skills, and you can use this resource. And even of course some learners are of the view that you help improve the learning process, of course, and you help improve teaching process if they know how to use computer. For teachers, again, it's really a great source. Teacher can use computer for language teaching, right? And if the teachers know about different websites, and if they have access to the latest websites, they can refer those websites to the students. They can give links to the students, and students can use those websites for their success. And nowadays it is age of information technology, and of course computer has become an important part of our life. So in this particular, the language teaching process, computer is playing its role, and we have seen that the students use it for the positive purposes. The linguistic students, language students particularly, use it for the language learning process, and the teachers do use it. But of course, when we use these programs, we need to know that what are the principles of this CAL. And while discussing these principles, you remember that we talked about evaluation. So we discussed that what to evaluate, and we saw that appropriacy of the program is important. we discussed that learner needs should be kept in mind, and we saw that in fact you see we need to understand that whatever the software that we are using, is it for a self-study or is it for a classroom activity. And even we saw that whatever the software or the game that we use, is it appropriate for the learners or not. So these things we saw in the last class. And we also saw that authenticity of a program is important, right? Because the computer is an important source for language the teaching, but authentic softwares really work. Authentic softwares help improve language teaching. Authentic softwares help learners learn language, and authentic softwares, in fact, you see make the learning in fact effective. And I mean, in fact, authentic softwares make learning meaningful, right? So my dear students, of course, whatever software you use, whatever the program that you being teachers refer to your students, right, the links that you give to your students, of course you need to censor those softwares, you need to censor those the programs, you need to see those the games so that learner would make use of them, right? Because every program may not be for the children, every program may not be for the adults. Some programs are there, they are useful for the children, and some are very effective for the adults. So that's why we have to you have to be very careful for the authenticity of that program. Then the feedback again is important, that how feedback comes, and we saw that how does the program offer feedback is really important. The role of the learner is important, role of the teacher is important as far as the feedback is concerned. Then what is expected of the learner is equally important, right? That what should we expect from the learner, and what is expected of the teacher, right? So these are some of the things, my dear students, that you need to keep in mind, of course, when you teach language to the students. And because we are students of this program, we are students of TEFL, so we are expected of so many things that, and I mean, what we are supposed to do, that we need to know as many programs as we can, and we need to execute those programs, in fact, and we need to inculcate this, and of course this computer in fact interest among the students, and we need to tell them that they are the language students, and this computer can do wonders for them in language learning process. And of course the computer does a lot for the teachers. If you being teachers, you see, if you get to know how to use a software or a website, so it really helps you, it saves your time, right? And we also saw technological appropriateness is appropriateness is important. That you see, when you refer a program to somebody, you need to know that what are the software is required for it, and what are for the hardware required for it. So hardware specification and the software requirements also I mean should be communicated to the students for language learning process. This was all about the CAL, computer aided language learning. Let's start today's lecture, and initially I gave you a view of it, an overview of it. That is a very simple topic, language acquisition, right? And if you remember, in the last semester we discussed that what is the difference between language acquisition and language learning, and I gave you different views, right? And I told you that researchers say that language acquisition is for language 1, that we all have acquired language 1, and how did we acquire that? You know that we acquired that language by listening to the parents, by listening to our siblings, by listening to our people around. So that was language acquisition. However, language learning is in fact the language 2. Every language other than the first language that you learn is language learning process. Like we are learning English, of course, and we have learned other languages. However, we have acquired L1 from our mother, from our parents, from our father, right, from our siblings around, right? So these lecture, in fact, this lecture 29 and lecture 30, they're important, and I told you that these lectures, in fact, they refresh you, of course, refresh your memories, jog your memories for what that you see we started off, I mean, 1 year back. You see, we discussed that language acquisition is a process in which we acquired language one. So let's see in lecture 29, this lecture we're talking about that what is language acquisition and what are different theories involved here. So dear students, the first language acquisition, and again the first language acquisition, the first language that you have acquired, it could be your Urdu, it could be Punjabi, it could be Saraiki, right? And sometimes we also call it what native language, and sometimes we call it mother tongue, mean the language of the mother. If mother speaks Punjabi, and of course the child that acquires Punjabi, and mother speaks Saraiki, mother speaks Pashto, mother speaks Hindko, mother speaks Chinese, German, French, whatever language the mother speaks, so child naturally acquires that language, you see. So we call it first language acquisition. And you know, of course, it's a really important experience for the parents as well, that you see they really enjoy, of course, language acquisition process of their kids whenever they see that the child in fact uses in fact the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds, and then the child moves on to the babbling stage, and of course again before the cooing stage, all different stages are there, you see. So again it's a wonderful experience for the language, of course for the parents, and you see for the people around when they see the child in fact that of course babbling, cooing, of course, or the crying. So there is a sequence, if you see here on the slide, that well there's a mother and a child, and you see how mother talks, how mother communicates with her child, of course, and when child responds, right? And sometimes the child responds e, oo, at times child cries, at times child makes the faces, right? So again the child takes verb, right? So child vocalizes. So all these are what you see, it's a dialogue, and you must have seen mothers talking with the children in fact, and that's why the impact of mother tongue on the children is more vis-a-vis the father's impact, because the reason being that the mothers interact with children more than the father does, right? Mostly in fact, now things have changed, but generally in fact the more time you see mothers spend with their kids, so of course mother's influence is more on the personality of a child as compared to the father. So for language acquisition, we also call it L1, is the term most commonly used to describe the process whereby children become speakers of their native language and languages. So this is the process in which what happens, the children, they become speakers, right? So I mean, and speakers of what? Of their native language, right? Of course, speakers of their mother, of course, of their mother tongue. And you see, since it's a process, and of course you see, we cannot say that this process takes, I mean, completes in a jiffy, or the process does not take time. This process does take time, in fact, and of course you see the researchers say that even before the birth, the child in fact starts, of course, I mean, this language learning process in fact starts before the birth. And even you must have heard about that the documentary In the Womb, it says that before the birth, a child can distinguish between harsh and the soft sounds. So the first language acquisition, it is what? In the process in which the children, they become speakers of what? Of their native language. And you see the process is very, I mean, see this importance of this process, how the child, and generally for the language acquisition, the more efforts in fact the child puts himself, right? I mean, you see the children put more efforts in language acquisition, the process. Parents, somehow the parents correct them, but generally in fact what children do, that they listen to their siblings, they listen to the parents, of course, they listen to people around, and they start, I mean, imitating, fine, and of course they start rounding their lips, and finally you see the child starts uttering words. So here, I mean, this is remarkable for the speed with which it takes place, right? And of course, I mean, it's the speed, of course, this language acquisition is really remarkable. And you see this change with every month, every week. Of course, there is development. In fact, there is evolution, right, in the language acquisition. The process, the speed of acquisition has led to the belief that there is some innate proposition in the human infant to acquire language. Like you see, the language cells are there. Language is innate. The way, because a child, in fact, passes through different stages. The way the child, in fact, acquires language one, so it shows that there is something innate. This is usually called language faculty, with which each newborn child is endowed, right? So every child, when of course is endowed, is blessed with this language faculty, right? And of course, I mean, the proof is that, you see, the process of language acquisition is very fast, right? And they show that there is something in the mind of the child, and once he comes on earth, of course, so he's, I mean, quickly, in fact, something is there, right? And it comes out, right? This, what do we call this inside? We call it language faculty. Yeah, basically two approaches to the language, to the question of first language acquisition, right? First one is the behaviorist approach, and second is the innate approach. There are two approaches, in fact, the behaviorist approach and innate approach. Now, this is what behaviorist approach. Very simple, in fact, you must have heard about it 1,000 times. The behaviorist approach, and of course, when I say this approach, behaviorist approach, and in the last lecture we also talked about this approach while talking of computer-aided language learning. And this, whenever we utter this approach, behaviorist approach, and you see the name comes to your mind is B.F. Skinner. So I mean, let's see the following with example. Let's suppose a baby is hungry, she babbles, she does not pronounce the right word, milk for the milk she wants, so she gets corrected. She imitates the correct sound and gets understood. She gets the milk she wants. All the time the baby is observing, imitating. So this is what we see. It's a very common experiment, you see, common observation, that how children, in fact, learn, in fact, how children learn to say a word, and there are different phases. Initially, child, in fact, develop different names for a particular product that the child wants. For example, the milk, right? Initially, of course, I mean, maybe the child tries to convey this message through a non-verbal gesture, or even when child cries and you give the milk to the child and you feel that this crying is, of course, crying means that the child is hungry, in fact. So, and even sometimes when the child is crying and you give him milk and the child does not accept milk, which means the child is not well, right? So there could be many factors, in fact. That's why when the crying has a different message. And slowly and gradually, of course, the child, in fact, uses different ways to express the message, and a time comes when a child learns that word exactly, and he asks for the milk. The child imitates the speech around it using a process of trial and error, and this is again important, that this hit and trial method, of course, it works there in this language acquisition process. So this child imitation process is very important in language acquisition. You must have seen that, you see, that whenever you utter a word and the child initially tries to imitate you, right, and that the process of imitation may not be correct. And what happens that, you see, when you say, for example, I mean, ba, and the child simply says ba, right, and then you correct him that ba, and of course maybe the child says ba, right, and slowly and gradually, you see, a time comes when the child starts saying ba, and then of course, and sometimes the child cannot utter both the sounds ba. So this imitation process itself takes time, right? We cannot say that a child can copy a word, copy a sentence in the first go. So the child takes time in even imitating, and in this process, you must have seen, you must have experienced it, that what do? We in fact correct the child, right? At times we encourage his statements, and at times we discourage. At times we reject his word and we give him alternative, right? And at time what we do, that we correct the child, in fact. So this, I mean, there is a response, right? Stimulus, response, imitation, reinforcement, right? And this goes on, in fact, and this process of imitation helps child, in fact, acquiring that L1, in fact. And this imitation, of course, when sometime you see that the child himself, in fact, tries to correct a word. And here environment is that when you must have seen in an environment where there are more siblings and more family members in a home, so this imitation process is faster than, right? Because when a child has more siblings, so what the child does, that he talks, right, with those siblings, and you see those siblings, in fact, even correct him. So it has been observed that you see when people of same age, or the age difference is 3 to 4 years, so the child, I mean, children pick things more from those people as compared to the adults, right? When adults, in fact, they correct a child, so that correction may not be long lasting vis-a-vis. You see, if an elder brother of 6 years corrects his younger brother, so this is way that it helps. And again, you see, if a child lives alone and he does not have enough family members around, so his process of imitation may be slow. And sometimes you might have seen that you see the child speaks very difficult language. So why it happens? Because maybe the child is the only child in the family, and of course his parents are, I mean, doing a job, and with that job is, of course, more of that. I mean, the parents are researchers, they are doing research, and of course they talk about those areas, and the children naturally copy those things. So dear student, this imitation process, of course, and language acquisition does a lot, and that's why some people, you must have seen some children, they abuse, in fact. So I mean, it is not their fault that they abuse. Why they abuse? Because they have heard somebody abusing. Some children, they misbehave, and why do they misbehave? Why? Because they have seen somebody misbehaving, right? And some children, in fact, act irrationally. And why does it happen? Because those children have seen somebody in this way. So that's why, of course, the environment of a family, in fact, helps a lot in the language acquisition, the process, and imitation plays an important role. And here mean the response, in fact, to a statement of a child really important. Of course, if the child says something and is I mean, responded, of course, corrected, in fact, so things, in fact, of course, prove the things do well. This is what language, we call it. I mean, the child imitates the speech sounds, imitates the words and all that. Now, what is this innateness approach, right? So we talk about, I mean, Skinner in the last lecture as well, that B.F. Skinner, of course, behavioral approach. So what is this innateness approach? The behaviorist hypothesis of first language acquisition has been strongly challenged from 1960 onwards, right? And now you know that behaviorist approach was that language learning is a habit formation. The language is learned through drills, right? The more the drills you give to the students, to the learners, the more they would learn. So to drills, in fact, and help learners learn the language. So this approach was challenged in 1960 onwards, and you see, especially under the influence of Noam Chomsky, linguistic theories and cognitive psychology. So this innate hypothesis says that the ability to acquire a human language is part of the biologically innate equipment of human being. It also claims that the built-in ability is linked in some manner to psychological maturation. So that is what this innate thing. We call it language faculty, right? What do we call it? Language faculty. That Noam Chomsky's theories. That is something which is innate, something which is there, right? And earlier we saw that this speed of language acquisition, of course, proves it. That how come that the child, of course, improves his, of course, learns language very fast, and with every week, every month, we find changes, right, we find more development in the language acquisition, the process. So this Chomsky's, in the light of Chomsky's theory, is this innate hypothesis, right, and which is there in front of this your screen, that language is language. It is there. It is innate. It is there. In fact, right. What we do, we try to bring that language out. In fact, and again, of course, if it, I mean, and then what are the aspects of this innate quality of language that you see? Again, whatever your environment is, right. If you live among in a rich environment where you have variety of languages, so of course naturally learning of languages would be easy for you. And if you're that innate quality of that innateness, that the innate feature of that language is a different one, so naturally you would find it hard to learn the language. So this innateness of the language, that something which is there, something is which is we call it language faculty, right? And of course, once we start the learning that, of course, acquiring that the language, and since it is innate, so that acquisition process definitely improves. So this was the approach was challenged. The behaviorist approach was challenged in 1960, and how it has been challenged in the light of Chomsky's the theory. And the theory says that it is something which is innate. Language is innate. Language faculty is there, and language cells are developed in the development of a child, right? So when these cells are developed, and even I have just told you that of course before the birth, even the child can distinguish between good sounds and hard sounds, right? And the reason being, what's the reason? Because maybe and sometimes you see that the child, of course, in the day in the womb, the child, in fact, remains quiet. Right? See, at night the child disturbs the mother. What is the reason behind it? The reason is in the day there is noise outside and the child becomes quiet. At night when there is silence outside and the child comes out, in fact. So this is what we call it innateness hypothesis, which says that language is innate. Language is what? A faculty that we have. So there is example, of course, see that children become competent speakers of language at a comparatively early age. Whatever the environment, children, in fact, they open their eyes, so they acquire that language. You see, whatever the environment is, a Chinese child, of course, open eyes in English-speaking environment, so he would be in fact, acquiring that language. A French child, in fact, opens his eyes in Chinese-speaking environment, so definitely he would be acquiring Chinese language. So that's why, of course, in early age, children have this competency to have it, right? So before they are ready for the cognitive complex tasks, like learning mathematics, physics, or chemistry, before that they become competent speakers of the language. It has also been observed that the children all over the world go through some stages in language acquisition regardless of their linguistic environment. You see, the process is universal, and this reminds me of universal grammar as well, that of course, what is the concept of universal grammar? Yes, UG, of course, that all languages have some features common, in fact, right? So, and on that, of course, some languages have some common features, so that's why we make a grammar that is a universal grammar. So children do not choose their first language. They can learn any language equally well as long as they are in the right linguistic environment. A Chinese child will pick up English as his first language if he is born in an English-speaking country. This probably shows that all human language share certain universal properties, such as they have all nouns, verbs, and so on. And all the human children are born with knowledge of these universal properties. And all languages have words. All languages have sentences. All languages, some words are nouns, some words are pronouns, right? And of course, the pattern may be, there are maybe differences. The script may be different. Some languages start from right to left. Some are written left to right. Some are written top to bottom. So, but there are some features which are common to all languages, and we call it universal grammar. So that's why the environment of a child is very important. In fact, that which environment the child has opened his eyes, right? So if he has opened the child in a rich environment, so of course his language would be rich. And if he opens his eyes in an immoral environment, in a bad environment where there are more wrong activities, so child would be picking those those words. And you know that of course the child mind is a tabula rasa, in fact, right? So whatever is whatever you input, you will find the outputs, right? So environment, the role of environment is equally important. Now, what are the stages of the first language acquisition? It's very, very important, the topic, my dear students, right? And you need to know, and you have already discussed these stages in your other courses as well. So a good deal of research on the acquisition of first language focuses on children's early utterances, right? The utterance, of course, that what are the early utterances of children. The established, of course, the establishment of a stage of acquisition is probably the best, of course, known outcome of the research on children's language. So there are several stages have been identified. The first one is, we call it pre-language stage, and it's 3 to 10 month stage, in fact, pre-language stage, of course, right? Initially, of course, the child comes on earth, and then from 3 to 10 months, what happens in that 3 to 10 months, of course, the child starts, at times, that child starts smiling, of course, child starts using some in fact sounds, right? Maybe the vowel sounds, of course, and sometimes with that you move on to consonant sounds. So there is, of course, the child smiles also. At times child makes noise, and at times child directs things, in fact, and child, of course, sometimes child loves his mother, of course, and of course recognizes his mother, goes to his mother, so all that. This is what pre-language stage, and we call it 3 to 10 month stage. Then there are one-word stage or holophrastic stage, 12 to 18 month. This is another, in fact, stage of language acquisition. We call it holophrastic stage, mean 12 to 1, mean almost 1 year to 1.5 year, right? And this is what we call it one words, right? Hollow mean one, and then one word stage is there, and the age limit is 1.5 year. 2 word stage, almost 1.5 year to 20 months, right? 2 months, right? And then the telegraphic speech, 2-3 years old, in fact, right? So these are what, my dear students, stages of acquiring the first language that we have seen. There are, of course, there are 4 stages are there as far as language acquisition is concerned. The first stage is what we call it pre-language stage, right? That before, what is the pre-language stage, right? You might know it later, that of course these are the sounds, right? Of course, and these can be, initially the child begins with the vowel sounds, right? A, E, U, right? U. And then, of course, moving on to the what obstruction there is, what the consonant sounds. So pre-language sound is simply there, the child is able to utter some sounds, right? And then he moves on to the one word, right, or holophrastic, milk, m and ma, ba, right, da, da, for example, right? So the one word, right, or holophrastic stage. And then you have the 2 word stage, is of course from 18 months to onward 20 months. And then you have what telegraphic stage, right? And of course, my dear students, what you being of course student of this course, you see people around, right? What you need to do is that please observe and see, get the first hand knowledge, right? And see when a child comes on earth and what happens in the first month, right? And of course, but generally what happens in our society, that of course when a child comes, of course we forget everything, right? But the good thing is that whenever you have this opportunity, a child in your family, and see, even observe the crying of a child, right? And you see that crying improves, and of course weekly, you can find the difference, in fact, and you can see the color, of course, of a child. And for the first day, the baby is generally reddish in color, right? And of course, after a week, baby, you find a change, right? And it is said that the baby changes its color, of course. Initial 3 months or 4 months, you cannot recognize what is about the complexion of a child, and that complexion keeps on changing, right? So dear students, in fact, that is what you need to do, is that observe things, that what happens, you being language expert, you being teacher of this language. So see that as far as language 1 is concerned, and why you should see it, again, it's a good question, the point is that, you see, once you see the process of language acquisition, and you see it, of course, as a researcher, so that would help you in language, to learning, right? So see a child, in fact, observe a child, you see what does he do, how does the child, in fact, how does he move on, how does he pick things, in fact, and which areas, of course, how does in fact he move on. So this is what, my dear students, that we have to observe, right? And you see, this observation, you can document that observation, right? Then of course after 1 month, what are the changes in that. If you are a researcher, and that the findings would definitely help you, that after 30 days, right, that what changes you have noticed in the child, and then from 30 days to 60 days, what changes you have observed them from that 60 to 90 days, like 3 months to 10 months, of course, what are and these are the more changes you will observe in child, and that we call it pre-language stage. And then of course the one word stage, and how does child, in fact, what are what we call them, the ways the child comes to the one word state. It is not that, of course, of course, quickly the child jump to the one word. No, there is a process behind that. So child takes time, right, so that he would be able to utter a word. So and what happens actually, what happens exactly when a child tries to utter a word, and what are the stages the child, of course, undergoes, right, to be able to finally utter a word. And of course, for example, the child says ma or mama, right? So what happens, right, with the child, in fact, what are its place of articulation, what are the manner of articulation. So these things you can observe, and you can document things. So once you do it, once you document these things, then you can write your own research, and then you can refer to B.F. Skinner, you can refer to Noam Chomsky's of their innateness, language faculty, and then you can refer to B.F. Skinner, their behaviorist theory. And then you could say, maybe, of course, once the B.F. Skinner and the Noam Chomsky's, of course, they suggested some views, but nowadays, in fact, we are in 2000, in this century, you see, that what changes have been adopted, of course, are there in this language acquisition process. Or you could say that there are no changes; it is still there, as it was suggested by experts, right? And then again, you see, you have the two-word stage, of course, that like we see that only 2 months, with the gap of 2 months, we realize that the child moves on to the two-word stage. And then what happens to two-word stage, again, it's important. And then finally you have what? Telegraphic speech, which is, well, important. So dear students, this is what mean that today we have a short lecture on this language, of course, stages of acquiring the first language. Let's see the summary of this lecture. Again, it's a very, very important area, a very, very good experience for the parents to see their children acquiring language. And you know, the child itself is a great blessing of Almighty Allah for the families. And of course, without children, families are what? They are what? Disorganized. And the children bring, in fact, what life in the families. In fact, you can ask those families where they don't have children, they are issueless. So those families, in fact, find it very, very hard, and sometimes they try their level best to have children. Of course, they visit different doctors, of course. So they try their level best to have a child, right? And in some families there are more children, and they get sick of them. But the point is, we need to accept it. We need to accept that it's a great blessing of Almighty Allah. And the good thing is that observing this language acquisition process, so we need to observe it keenly, in fact, and we need to document this. And again, you see that the point, if you are a researcher, and of course if you are the student of this course, you need to understand it, that what happens exactly right? That what are the experiences, and of course what you can do is that you can visit, I mean you can interview different mothers, and of course they would give you different ideas, and that those views can be in fact put together and see that is there any difference in the language acquisition of course of different children, or more or less all children in fact follow the same the pattern of what language acquisition that they have. What they have a babbling stage, they have a cooing stage, they have a holophrastic stage, and they have a one word stage, and they have a pre-language stage, and they have a telegraphic stage. So I mean you can do research on that, right? And then if there are any differences, then you can say that why there are differences, because maybe there are some climatic factor, there are some social factors, there could be so many factors, right? And those factors, you can say that because of these factors, I mean that this language acquisition process has, of course, maybe they have some modifications, right? So that is what important. So the parents are just such a joy, of course, and really it's a great moment for the parents when the child utters the first word, of course, or child even opens his mouth, right? Or even child smiles, or the child, I mean, so that smile again, it's a message, right? So the first language acquisition is, of course, the term that most commonly used to describe the process whereby children become speakers of their native languages, of course. And again, it is said that, of course, a 5-year-old child can learn more than one, can acquire more than one languages, and it has been seen that, you see, the father is Pashto speaking and the mother is Punjabi speaking, and of course child has acquired both the languages, you see. So yes, it means that, of course, that is the age that the child are competent, the children are competent at that stage, so they can easily in fact acquire languages, you see. So children have this capability to acquire, of course, more than one languages, and experience has proved, of course, I mean the research has proved that, you see, the families where there is a diverse cultural marriages, so children of course have learned more than or acquired more than one languages. So L1 acquisition is remarkable for the speed with which it takes place. The speed of an acquisition has led to the belief that there is some innate proposition. Again, I will go back to Chomsky's that theories, of course, that what is it? It is something which is innate, which is there. Language faculty is there, of course, and that's why children can easily, of course, I mean, acquire language. And there are approaches, of course, you know these approaches that talk about, that is behaviorist approach and innate approach. Well, students, so we're talking about these the two approaches. One was the behaviorist approach by B.F. Skinner, and then what innateness approach. And what is behaviorist approach? Very simple, that language acquisition, of course, that is a process that of course that is achieved through the various drills, right? That see, once you give more drills to the students, and seeing this, of course, and the teachers have started using different drills. And if we remember audiolingual method, where there are of course lots of drills were there, so that language, of course, becomes a habit for the learner. And the more drills that you give to the students, right, and the more they learn. And in this way, what happens, that there is no second thought that you see among the students, because if they practice a dialogue for 30 times, for the 40 times, and then what happens, that expression of those dialogues will become part of the teacher's of the learner's language. So whenever he tries to say something, those sentences come forward, and those sentences help him out. So that's why once it becomes that the dialogue, of course, that expression that the user has used, the learner has used, if it becomes a habit of the learner, so things in fact would become easy for the language for the language acquisition process. Innate approach, of course, we talked about that there is something which is there. Language cells are there, language is developed, right? So once we start talking of, we start speaking of that, the language, my dear students, then what happens? You see, then that innate language faculty comes out, and that language faculty, in fact, you see, helps, of course, the learner. So there are two approaches. One approach says that language is learned through drills, that the more drills you give a learner, the more he learns. And of course, in your Montessori schools, you must have seen that, well, the teachers, in fact, they give lots of drills. And academies, you see, that language learning is done through different drills. And of course, and I mean, what are the weak areas of drills? You see, we discussed that language is not, we cannot confine language to a small limit. What language is open, of course. Language requires, in fact, for language, you see, when you communicate in that language, you have to speak in the different situations, right? So for that situation, every situation demands a different expression, right? And for this purpose, my dear students, you have to keep in mind that, you see, this a behaviorist approach has the problem. But however, the innate approach says that, well, language itself is there, language faculty is there. What we do is that we have to bring that faculty out. And again, it is said that, of course, when you teach language, of course, the language is there. Language there in the passive form, of course, and we have to bring that language out, because maybe in our system, we're talking about the local system, because for us, for our students, in fact, they start learning this language from class 1 onwards, but when it comes to speaking, they cannot speak. Now the question is why they are unable to speak, because maybe they, of course, in their schools, right, the language was not taught as per the requirements. Of course, it was taken as a subject that was taught, and of course was examined, and the student passed that paper, right? So there was no focus on communication skills, and there was no focus on, of course, the use of the language. So that's why, of course, students had some problems, that maybe they can write in that language, they can write English, but they cannot speak language fluently. So what are the reasons behind? Of course, they are that, well, the teaching is one of the factors, environment is the factor, motivation of the learner is another the factor, right? The training of a teacher is another factor. The teachers who teach language, they are not trained, right? So they are habitual of using grammar translation method, and they don't know about the other approaches of language, the teaching. They follow the approach which they were taught once they were the students. So again, the lack of the proper training in the teaching language, right? Of course, lack of interest of the learner, lack of interest of the teachers also, and administrators, the environment. All these are the factors that, you see, that pave the ground for the poor, of course, communication skills, for the poor speaking, of course, of our students in our educational system. And that's why there's of course, students come for the language program even after doing their master's degree. If I told you in the last semester, there are some people, they have after having done their masters in English, they come for the language programs. So why is it so? Because, you see, they're very good at writing. Of course, they wrote a lot, and they took the exam and they passed the exam. But the point is, when it comes to speaking, they are the failure. They are not successful. So where does the fault lie? The fault lies with the system. The fault lies with the instruction. The fault lies with the environment where they are teaching. And again, of course, the point is that, of course, the government is also working hard to train, in fact, the teachers for language teaching. In fact, you see, if they teach the language, of course, by considering in fact the latest methodologies, so definitely the learner would learn that language, of course, and learner would be comfortable, right? So but this, our system is in fact, so far what we have seen, that I just told you that people come for language program. These are the people where they could not have the opportunity. Now things have changed. In fact, in some schools you find that, of course, the medium of instruction is the teacher teaches that language in the target language, and of course, and the communicative language teaching approach is used. So, of course, they are important. Even for the language acquisition process, of course, now the parents are more educated, so they have awareness how to help a child, in fact, acquiring language. Though, I mean, we understand that we cannot, of course, teach some words and expressions, of course, to our children while he acquires language one, but still, you see, the parents knowing the, of course, in fact, knowing the process of language acquisition, the parents keep on giving input, right? And that input works fine. And now parents have realized that, of course, language acquisition process is an important process, and of course how child moves from one stage to another, and from second stage to third stage, and what else could be done, right? What else could be done to improve this language acquisition process? And more research is being done, in fact, on this language acquisition process. Of course, like I told you earlier, that you can see children around, and you can see there the process of language one acquisition, and find out what are the changes if a child who learns a language one in Abbottabad and a child who acquires language one in Multan or Lahore, in Karachi, wherever you are, right? And you might find some differences, right? And see what are those differences. Of course, when a child acquires Punjabi in Multan, or a child acquires Pashto in Banu, so again you might find some dialectical differences. And why these dialectical differences are there? What are the factors? A lot of research is required, right? Even talk about Punjabi, you see, right? Punjabi of Lahore, you see Punjabi of Faisalabad, Punjabi of Rawalpindi, you see. So you will find different dialects of Punjabi. So is the case with Urdu. In fact, Urdu which is spoken in Karachi, and Urdu which is spoken in Lahore and Islamabad, right? So there are some differences, right? So this is what the point is, that so is the case that with language L1 acquisition, in fact, when a child acquires Hindko or Saraiki in Azad Kashmir, and a child acquires, in fact, that same language in Multan. So these are some of the factors, my dear student, that you must work on. You must see, right? And believe me that this language acquisition, of course, is a process which needs lots of research. Lots of research is being done on it, but more research is required. And I expect from you people that, of course, you would do research. Of course, you opt for the theses and take it, right, as your research area, right, and see what changes have come, in fact, or is it same that we of course we talked about earlier, right? And then see that, do you think that this language faculty is there? Is it innate, right? And how a child, in fact, moves from one word stage to another stage? What changes exactly take place, in fact? And of course, some and even you must have seen that some in fact children, they are slow learners. They acquire, I mean, this L1, and they take time. And again, some learners, they are quick learners. In fact, they learn the language and they learn it quickly, right? So it varies from the learner to learner. In fact, again, it varies from, I mean, for the girls, in fact, they acquire L1, in fact, more faster, in fact, as than, you see, the boys. It is generally, it has been seen that the girls, in fact, start speaking language, in fact, of course, I mean an age, right, earlier than what you say the boys. And boys are comparatively, I mean, a bit slow, this is what has been observed. But you see, maybe you will find an example where the boy, in fact, the male child, in fact, acquired that language earlier than a female child. And then you can see, you can compare, of course, the environment in one home. If it is a controlled environment, there is a one child, and of course, how does he acquire language? And then in another home, there are 5 children. How does that, of course, last child acquire the language? So you will find some differences there, or you can change, you can take this environment to a different situation. So these are the factors, in fact, my dear students, which you need to do research and see that what changes take place when a child acquires L1, the child acquires language 1, and of course what are the problems faced by the children, and how parents can improve their language language acquisition, the process. And above all, what our job is that, of course, how this L1 language L1 acquisition process can improve our L2 learning process, in fact, of language acquisition. Because mind you that, of course, the natural way is that we first listen to that language, and then we try to speak that language, and then we try to read, and finally we write. So that those, I told you earlier, that these four skills that we have, of course, and we teach 4 skills to the students of language 2. So dear students, in fact, that's why we focus on L1 acquisition process. That L1 language acquisition process, in fact, help us in improving our of language to learning. So this is what you have to see, that, of course, do you think that what researcher has said, that generally, of course, you want to learn a language, and you start learning by listening to that language, and of course there is a syllabus, there is for listening only, and then you move on to other areas. For example, you want to focus on writing skills, you want to focus on reading skill and speaking and all that. So this is enough for this lecture. We will see, inshallah, in some other lecture, of course, and we have a next lecture. We will see that how we, in fact, learn L2, the language 2. This lecture was on language 1 acquisition, and next lecture would be lecture number 30. That in that lecture we will be talking about what L2 learning. Remember these stages of L1 acquisition, that we have pre-language stage, we have one-word stage, we have two-word stage, and finally we have what? Telegraphic speech. With this, it's time to say goodbye. See you in the next lecture. Till then, it's Allah Hafiz.